I work in the area of development in Auroville. I'm not going to say I'm an architect because architecture for me is a byproduct of the work I do. So working in the field of development, my main concern is about settlement planning. You can't have a human settlement without actually having a certain system of water supply, distribution, disposal, and security of all these systems for the health and the social economic functioning of the place. So in a way, it is the entire circulatory system, like in a human body, that allows the settlement to function. Now, settlement could be a housing cluster, it could be a whole block, a zone, and a city.
Right now, I am one of the members in TDC. As you all know, water is a very important part of planning, and which means we talk about underground water, surface water, bore wells, sewage lines, sewer lines, water lines. So it kind of comprises the entire spectrum of whatever we could talk about in water. So yeah, so that is actually where I am in water. See, fundamentally in planning there are two important resources. One is the land, the other one is the water. And even after 50 years, we still haven't really completed that cycle or the loop, either with land or with water.
Started with regional planning and keeping Auroville relevant, because if we don't manage our water resources, neither will there be an Auroville, and neither will we be doing what we should be doing for the surrounding population. So that's what engaged me. I'd already worked with David Stein when I was in Lavinier previously, and it just made sense to be building and working on the concept of Auroville based on water security. And water is dropping, and it is going to be a problem, so it's really something that one can all rally around, and it's larger than just an Auroville-centric thing. It makes Auroville relevant also in, we've been relevant with all the green work that we've been doing, and this is just an extra step that piggybacks on the work that was already done of the last 50 years.
I am part of something called PVAC, which is Pondicherry, Viluppuram, Auroville, Kadalo Bioregion Initiative. So the whole idea of PVAC was to have a bioregional cooperative platform for the entire bioregion, so that they could be planning at a bioregional level, because Auroville is not in a bubble. Auroville exists in this context of not just the villages around, but a much larger, especially when it comes to water, there's a much larger bioregional context. There's a whole history of trying to make a bioregional planning between bringing the governments of Pondicherry and Tamil Nadu on board together with Auroville. Pondicherry, as you know, is in pockets. There are, I think, 16 or 17 pockets of Pondicherry in between Tamil Nadu. So for them, obviously, regional planning makes sense. And when it comes to water, it's so important because you have the entire, from Kaliveli tank. So there's the whole Kaliveli down to Usteri Lake and then down to Bahur. So there are those three major water bodies and the watersheds there. So the watersheds are sort of cross administrative, right? So when it comes to water planning, it completely makes sense to have cooperative planning. So cross district, a cross-administrative state, sort of Pondicherry, Tamil Nadu, and get citizens and government officials all together on one platform. So that's something that hasn't been attempted before. I don't think anywhere in India something like this exists. But I think here we are in Auroville and, Mother Sri Aurobindo, Pondicherry, this whole thing, we are uniquely placed to kind of experiment something like that.
I fundamentally personally believe if we have to really harness the potential of water, really make it available to the next generation in Auroville, without human unity we can't work with water. So water is not only a resource, water I find is the cornerstone or the pivot on which the human unity of Auroville could actually be placed. Human unity don't treat water just as a resource. It's much more powerful than that. It's a consciousness, I would say. It's an energy. Third, I would say, is look at land. Make sure we get the lands at the earliest. And the fourth is make sure we respect our rain. Look at rain as a resource. Look at rain as a kind of instigator of an energy called water. So I would say these four as a very important part of what we are looking at. I think that's the challenge. If Mother had given this magic formula, we wouldn't all be sitting and you wouldn't be having this interview, right?
The problem is like with global warming or the climate crisis. The problem with these issues is they're a little bit, esoteric and a little bit out there, and so people aren't able to really grasp the urgency of them. And so that's one issue. The other issue is that Auroville has a sort of reduced its idea of itself. And it's become a town plan or a city plan, and it's sort of divorced of the living spirit that actually makes it relevant and that brings it forward. So the challenges are having people understand that Auroville will only be relevant if it's not just a city plan and if we don't just concentrate on a small circle. Auroville is much larger than that, and for Auroville to be sustainable, it'll have to have an impact on the surrounding, positive impact on the surrounding areas in terms of ecological security, which is water and the soil and all of that. The challenge is for Auroville to be the example. At a little bit, for example, I wrote to the Matrumandira, we don't stand on an ethical foot when we are watering lawns and have huge cubic meters of water that we're spending on a garden, when we should be trying to do more dry gardens, finding grass that doesn't require much water, because it's very hard for us to give lessons if we ourselves are not following them. What's happened in Auroville is everybody thinks in silos now. Everybody's creating Auroville in their own little silo, but Auroville already exists. So the mindset has to be, what does Auroville need? Not like, oh, I need to make this because I'm not seeing it in Auroville. I would like my own little Auroville space. Everybody's trying to make a little Auroville within Auroville, but Auroville is there. So the mindset has to change to something that is bigger.
So PVAC was an attempt really to have bioregional planning, and there have been many attempts along the way, and the usual sort of bureaucratic sloth, often not enough follow-up from Auroville side as well contributed. So trying to get PVAC going itself has been a problem. It's not particularly related to water, but just getting, because it's a completely new idea. You see, it's very rare in India to have states actually cooperating. You have something called the Interstate Council, but that's for larger kind of things, but in a very specific area to have cooperative planning, it's quite hard. So one of the big huge problems of India as a whole, it's not just this region, is encroachment. So water bodies are actually encroached upon, they are built, people fill them up and then build on them, instead of realizing that these are incredible resources and you have to protect all areas where water flows. So when the big huge floods happen in Chennai as well as in Pondicherry, well, it's because it's our fault, human beings. We've gone and built on the water bodies.
So one of the main challenges I find is the lack of qualified and committed, what we call electrical, mechanical, plumbing consultants on the base technical level. So we can have all kind of nice big schemes and other things, but we don't have anybody who can actually carry forward the work till the end of the program, who can actually implement the projects. And given the fact that even when we find these people, there's such a high turnover, we're not able to keep them. The second challenge is we do not have trained people to do the management of the systems once they're in place. We actually rely on people who are given a skill training in a very small component, and if something goes on and off somewhere, they are lost. They improvise, which often makes the situation worse. And we do not have any training program for skill development for management, what we call facility managers. Third is, which is actually key to the other two problems, is the resident population. It's very difficult in Auroville to retain the interest of the people. You have events, you have these awareness weeks, you have programs, you have all kind of things, and then they move on. And Auroville is an international city in making, with a diversity of ethnic, national and a socio-economic group, which is very important because it creates a buffet of how you deal with problems, you know, perceptions of solutions. But when it comes to something as critical as water, rather than building on these experiences to apply them to this context, what I find is that it actually creates conflicts. A person who comes from Northern Europe starts questioning the way we conserve water here, because there's different standards there. And then another person who would come from the local area, for whom piped water is a reality of the last 25 years. We do not have the communication tools to unify this diversity presently when it comes to dealing with water. Money and technology, whether it is in the US, where it's nicely available, whether it's in Northern Europe, or even in certain countries where they can put in public funding, has not solved the problem of how do you protect your ecosystem services to ensure that your water sources are consistently replenished, not polluted. It does not solve the problem of equity and accessibility to water. It does not solve the problem of how do you deal with disasters related to water, scarcity or too much. We need to stop using capital and high tech as a weapon against actual research and people's participation to find context driven solutions that are geographically appropriate, which will of course then change the settlement pattern. If you're going to live in Tamil Nadu, coastal Tamil Nadu, what happens? We have a lot of rainfall, we have no rivers, so it's not going to flow along our doorstep, it's going to fall on our heads. So what were people in Tamil Nadu doing? Collecting it in ponds, eries, tanks, and having filtration wells, supplying it. Doing a whole settlement, like the highest pond is next to the well, next to the temple, drinking. The well in the village is for washing. The wells in the fields are for animals and irrigation. So you control pollution, you ritualize in a way so that you prevent pollution, you make it equitable, and you can see your water resources going down, so you change your habits with the season. And if you start actually doing context-based planning and solutions built up to it, you will actually create something which is amazing.
Ideal scenario is if we actually had a will from both the governments, Pondicherry as well as Tamil Nadu, and we were able to get the collectorates, that is Viluppuram as well as Kadalur collectorates and Auroville all together, that it were actually recognized as a body for cooperative planning in the whole region. And that would be the ideal, to say that we're all human beings, we're all affected by whatever happens in this area, and we need to cooperate to do the best possible by all the people living here in this whole area.
My dream would be to adapt the master plan into a plan that fits the water security, and that is not a circle. That is, Auroville is situated between two large water bodies. One is Kalaveli and one is Ustari. And for me, everything has to segue like Russian dolls. one thing has to make sense here, and it makes sense here, and it makes sense here. And so the planning has to follow that kind of, you know, you don't just plan, oh, you know, our residential zone. No, if there are water sensitive areas in the residential zone, then those have to be protected. And so the minute city plan to the larger regional plan all has to make sense. My dream would be to take advantage of what we actually have in terms of what we can do for water security and enhance that. And so I would like us to develop more towards the Kaliveli side and be a corridor. So that would be a migratory corridor for animals. It would be the watershed up on the north is also very important for Auroville. So we would be securing those lands because we know whatever land that Auroville has, it has been protected. Animals come back, plant regeneration has come back, but we need to see this on a larger scale. And we need to also impart that information to the surrounding villages around us, because I think very soon, in the next 10, 15 years, we'll be facing a severe water crisis. And I'm identifying that a lot of the areas that we need to buy is like Perambuk gullies, which are like Odai Perambuk, where the water flows. So it's better that Auroville has land adjacent to that so that we can allow these areas to be wildlife corridors and water percolation areas. What I would like to see is, instead of us viewing, oh, it's city or environment, it's not one or the other. It's really both. Both things are needed, and the environment has to underpin everything, because that's the obvious thing that sustains us. That's the mother, that's the earth, that's what we're supposed to do, and the rest has to adapt.
First thing I would do is work on a land use and urban development plan that completely integrates topography, climate and the water needs, so that we have freshwater ponds with filtration wells and a network of these ponds holding water in such a way that the surface water, recycled water and the groundwater aquifer is the basis. It's almost like the circulation system of the city. Areas where you need more water are put into areas where you collect more water, so that you don't collect them here and pipe them all the way, because most of the people are there but you're collecting the water here. And so they don't know if they're polluting the water, if the water is going down. Area around water you want to protect because you don't want to pollute. So that's where your natural filtration with woodlands, parks and gardens happen. So water body is fringed with green, which makes it that it is public and everybody has access. Another off-print is that with this, the biodiversity goes up in the city automatically. So you see, it is a question of just one simple thing, and the cascade effect of it is incredible. It doesn't happen overnight, but if you have a structure and a strategic plan, you can slowly and cumulatively add to it.
So the pressing needs of my work demands me to look at water more as a commodity, which means, like, to make water be available for the generations to come. In the end, water becomes a very sustainable resource for Auroville, not that a finite resource which we can actually depend on and we keep depleting on. But that is on a very basic level. But if you actually ask me as an Aurovillian, what would be my dream for water? Water, I would say, is the very essence, the life for all of us over here. And somehow, I feel that actually has never been part of our conversations in Auroville. I mean, that is my dream. If we talk about water as a part of our conversations, as a part of life in Auroville, I think then I consider my dream to be fulfilled.
Everything we have already is enormous. We just have to enhance on it. It's all a paradigm shift, sadly to say. It's just all a mind pop. Like, in a few years we'll be saying how ridiculous that we wasted so much time in arguing something that seems so evident. Recently in Patanur side near Sadhana forest, the villagers actually endorsed Aviram to the collector to manage the Perambok land. And that's fantastic, because that means they recognize that this is going to be protected, this is not going to be flattened and used, and there's so much speculation going on in this area that, you know, so the villagers there are are able to see that, and it would be nice if that same kind of effort would happen here. What I think is the most important is that Aurovilians start sharing a little bit of the same underlying principles. So when I wrote a project, I was very excited because in the way I envisioned the project was that all the people, that we had these little water groups in all the villages, and the youth would be empowered to take measures of the water levels and everything, and all of this would go on a website that everybody can see, so that we start looking at ourselves in the watershed area, not just as a neighbor and this. So we start taking responsibility, because we know if the neighbor has his pump running all the time and the water is going nowhere, you know, they could signal this place, and you know, they could signal it, and everybody starts having a shared responsibility for our water.
Okay, the opportunities are what we created back then. I think that was 2018, wasn't it? The whole story with the highway. So what happened was, when we worked towards that, there was a meeting that happened in September, and it happened in Pondicherry, and it was supported by the Pondicherry Planning Authority. The Chief Secretary of Pondi was there, the Lieutenant Governor of Pondi came in, I think the Chief Minister also, you know, came in for some time, and from this side we had a Member of Parliament, wonderful person whom we had met for the highway. He came with the MLA, and we had Mr. Krishnan, who was at that time the planning secretary of Tamil Nadu, who I had gone to invite him for that meeting, and he had been sent by the chief secretary of Tamil Nadu. So it was a fantastic thing. We managed to get a huge step forward in getting both the governments to cooperate. So that was, I think, a wonderful opportunity, and but it's taken time after that to try and take the next steps. And especially water gives all these opportunities of cooperation. You know, that if we look at the larger thing of water, it is you have to cooperate. And it's a great tool. So we could maybe use the tool of water to get this whole thing of PVAC going. That was a wish. And yes, it's an opportunity, but it requires kind of consistent work and follow-up. Puducherry Water Rich, they said they're going to clean, and it was a fantastic thing, because you know what? It brought NGOs, citizens, government officials, everybody on the same platform. So in fact, there was a WhatsApp group which I was part of, which was wonderful. So you could actually interact with officials, and that was, you know, the Lieutenant Governor, she has that spirit and, you know, really wants to act and do things. So they cleaned up, and she really motivated everybody. So it became like a people's act, which is actually, in India, it's usually what is a people's initiative, became a government program. That's incredible. You know, and I really wish we had something like that in our Auroville area, which actually we don't, but Puducherry Water Rich at least gives us an example of what it could be. They had companies which actually gave the money, and they didn't give money to the government. They gave money directly to the JCBs that were desilting. So they, you know, they cleaned, I don't know how many kilometers of water channels got cleaned, because everything was clogged. So no wonder there were floods, because your water channels are clogged. And it's an example, so it's something that we could kind of try to emulate in our area. But it requires us to go out of our comfort zones, and we have to go beyond Auroville. I would really like that a lot of this knowledge is made in Tamil, and that we have also that we could have some young people who are trained by Julio and you know, learn about the whole background. And we have things in the schools, we have things with the women's groups, there's a, that we, and we do it in a cooperative way.
I would approach it in terms of programs. To create program for people saying, okay, do we all want in the next 5 years to take up a program that says, at least in this part of Auroville, we will integrate surface water management to use as potable water and integrate recycled water as part of flushing and irrigation. Then when we are doing the projects, we take up the planning part, but don't start with the map and the road and the this and that, and then people say, okay, kind of boring, and then they go home and nothing happens, you see. So start with programs which then actually ignites interest and people take ownership, then translate it into policy and project. The amazing thing is, water is one area where you would be able to get interest of people with capital, because one of the real problems that they have is access to water resources and a problem of disposal of waste, you see. So when they're giving out CSR money, if you actually tie in to their own thing, saying we are doing the prototype, whatever research and data and the system of data analysis, you fund it, we give it to you.
The one thing which actually fascinated me when I came to TDC is like, what is water? Because I had never seen the way I saw water before I came to Auroville. Because water over here is seen differently by people from different nationalities. Probably somebody from Alaska sees water differently compared to somebody from, I don't know, the deserts of Rajasthan sees it differently. But we all talk about water as if like, it's H2O for everybody. So it's actually not H2O for everybody. There's a strong cultural underlayer to it. There's a strong emotional aspect to it. And if you actually have to really make water tangible, the real challenges for me is about understanding the human unity part of it. So it has a very strong social part to it. My guess is water could be the tool for us to achieve human unity, and that is also the challenge, human unity. See, land and water, which are like the two sides of the same coin, if we don't have land, which means like we don't actually allow the water to take its natural course, right? And if we don't have water, then there's no point in having all the land. So when you look into a planning perspective, water is the invisible layer which you need to overlap on land. And then locally, if you see, like we have been a monsoon dependent land. We don't have a river in our vicinity. We are talking about maybe desalination in the future. We don't know, that's a futuristic thing. Yes, we can have a portfolio allocated for that, like to keep it happening. But currently, if you see the low hanging fruit, that is to actually look at rain. And rain is something which I have seen, like it's been intangible part of the local culture. So everything is seen as a part of rain. Thirumal, like Vishnu, he's seen as a manifestation of the rain bearing clouds. So there's so much of connectivity with rain, and that's actually a very active part in people's psychology. So the people are constantly reminded that that they are grateful to rain, that they are grateful to what rain gives. It's because of what rain gives, the water, which actually is the life-giving thing. It actually opens up and makes them fertile, makes the land fertile, makes the people's life fertile. The second most important chapter in Tirukkural is all about rain, which is mostly, he also ends up talking about water. So that is the kind of conversation people have been happening. And planning cannot talk only about pipelines or technologies without achieving something on that level. It will be only, you can only enforce it then. It could always be an alien technology. It will never be part of people. If it's not part of people, then it will have a shell life and it is bound to die. So in the planning perspective, if you see, water, until it rises to the consciousness of the people, then you could really make something tangible. But otherwise, like we can only create programs which is of a short term value, and basically we are only buying time on the hope, like that we could create a much better society. And in planning, if you see right now, we are only working, I would say, like probably more on that scale. Yes, I think there's fantastically lot of opportunities, and I should say, like we have also done quite good in that. because as nowhere else I have seen where people from so many countries coming together, working together in spite of the differences, trying to move in a certain directions. I realized when I go in nearby villages and all, even the quality of construction is much better. That's a fallout of what Auroville has done. So if that is somebody they see, they want to do something, they want to use a CACB block. I mean, they don't need to do it. They could say, look, my culture is different, Auroville culture is different. But there is something which resonates to them beyond economy, beyond money, and they have been receptive to it. And if that has reached them, so why not water?
If we say that just along one stretch where there are already several things happening, we overlay the water and we try to do it. That we trap all the surface water in different areas by having the topography, we make the filtration wells, we get some technically enabled people like Gilles Boulicotte and Sia over to connect to the existing water system and say, okay, from 2020 to 2025, we want to do this, that at least in 3 communities, 15 to 20% of the water is surface water. Can we do that? While you're doing it, you will see that other people get interested, but we are not able to take up projects in Auroville. It's now 4 years I struggle to just get the space which we have left between invocation to do the surface water treatment there. Between the planning and the experts and the neighbors agree, the settlement agrees, but I can't get through the bureaucracy.
We actually need a kind of a paid position where somebody who would understand the issues would anchor that office so that it could function and keep track of the issues, rather than the ad hoc way it's happening now.
We have to recognize in Auroville that the underlying basis for our life is water, and we have to adapt our plans to match with it. We have to work together with the local authorities and governments. We have to push, the practices of free electricity for farmers is understandable, but it's not going to work in the long run.
We should actively have something on the teaching curriculum, on the education level. Second is, somewhere we should start celebrating water, be grateful for the rain. It could be as a part of Auroville culture, whatever it could be. And third, we should actually see that we are creating a community, which means there is a cost, there is an extra cost to it. We should not be miserly in it. We should be more giving in, walking that extra step to make it happen. Whether it's making a bund when they are doing a construction to channelize the rainwater, or maintaining a sewage treatment system. Every Aurovillian has his role to play in it. It just can't be done by one office or by one planning group or by one governing board. Every Aurovillian has an active role to be playing in that. See, water, like I said, is an energy, it's a force. So you need to work on a multitude of levels. Planning can only create a framework for it. Maybe FAMC probably can create only an economic guideline for it, a commercial guideline for it. So there should be some entity which can actually represent, and the best would be is the community itself. So there should be a representative people from the community who could ensure that these things are followed. They don't need to push people, but at least they should kind of make it more participatory, bring in a wider audience with the community. So first and foremost, I would suggest is this vision, if it has to be implemented, it has to have a kind of a guidance group or something like that. And the guidance group is more of a kind of an auditing. Oh, you have promised something in 2 years, have we done it, have we achieved it, right? Because there are a lot of overlapping spheres which actually the current structure can't hold it. It is a kind of a consciousness, it's not something it can't be enforceable, it can't be made as a law, and that is the beauty with water, and that is why I feel it has this power to unify us, improve our consciousness. So this is the fundamental thing. Protection of land, purchase of land, that is an important aspect of it. Once you have this, then we could actually work on a vision policy, a concrete vision policy through TDC, FAMC, Green Group, whatever, So I think then we have enough of these groups empowered, entitled, whatever, resources to take it forward. And I'm so grateful and thankful that especially youngsters, they have taken it up in Auroville. And if we could actually continue this momentum, and if you could keep asking these questions, keep churning people about water, I think you have done a really fantastic job.
Focus on common concerns rather than the output, because we're constantly focusing on, do we get a water system that functions? Will we get a sewage treatment plant like this? Do we do this? Rather than focusing on the last final output, focus on the concern. Everybody is concerned about water security. Use the concern to come up with a model of development, not on what is going to be developed, but how we will develop. Because people can easily agree on the ethics of development rather than the nitty-gritty of development. The model of development is important. So, and if you say that our model of development for Auroville is based on sustainability, on equity and harmony.
We sometimes, I think, we are actually getting more concerned about the technology part of water. Actually, if you look into it, we as a community currently are still very small. But the other people who are sharing our bioregion are much greater in population, and they have a much bigger say because of the sheer size of the population. So whatever we try to plug in one or two small holes over there, they are creating a bigger holes, doesn't really help us. So we can have a feel good factor, but that's ultimately it's not going to really turn out into something tangible for us. So we actually have to actively collaborate and work with the people in the bioregion. Unless we change that whole thing, it is not going to happen. I do appreciate that we need to work on technology and everything, but that along with working with the people in the bioregion, the areas, the lakes, the pollution part of it, contamination of water, these things are really important, and our livelihood depends on the people with whom we share our bioregion. The very vision of Auroville depends on that.
My key message would be to change our planning and the projection of what Auroville looks like, and start really understanding that what needs to be projected is something that aims at protecting the water source for this environment. We should be on the cutting edge of figuring out what is the best. These are universal things, that these are our challenges, and we need goodwill to figure them out.
Okay, so the key messages are that Auroville exists in the wider context of not just the villages around, but also a larger context of the districts of Pondicherry, and our physical context is like Kaliveli, Usteri, Bahur. This whole area is our wider bioregion. So Auroville is part of that bioregion. So our solutions, our planning has to be at that level. One, so there's to be a bioregional planning, and two, that water is a huge opportunity of cooperation. That if we got out there, we have a whole lot of knowledge in Auroville, wonderful knowledge in Auroville, which can be shared and must be shared. And we must find cooperative platforms like PVAC to make it happen. And I think it's really a huge opportunity.